In this particular presentation, I want to look at the conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8. It starts about verse 25 and runs through the rest of the chapter. So you might want to read that, and then here are some of my observations. Even though the eunuch is a powerful man with many responsibilities, in fact, it said that he's in charge of all of Candace's treasure in verse 27. He had taken the time to come to Jerusalem and for the primary purpose of to worship God. Verse 27. What I have found in my experience of teaching people that are not Christians, that one major factor in whether a person is converted or not is their willingness to rearrange their schedule and life for God. This man is trying to find God. In Acts chapter 17, the Bible points out that that's our obligation, that to search and seek God because he's not far from each one of us. Romans 1:20 tells us that the universe was made by a creator, and that's clearly seen in the creation, and that puts upon us the obligation to go and look for that creator and seek to have a relationship with him. I find that we have a man that is grateful for the blessings in his life and is using them wisely. He had decided to come to Jerusalem to worship. He had purchased a portion or somewhere along the line and come into a copy of the scriptures, particularly of Isaiah chapter 8, verse 30. He did not allow himself to get sidetracked by the one thing that he could not fix in his life. He was a eunuch. He can't fix that. And it's interesting to me that he's not angry at God. He does not blame God, like, God, why did you allow this to happen to me? Eve in the garden gets sidetracked upon the one thing that she thinks that she cannot live without, on the one thing that she does not have. Haman in the book of Esther also gets sidetracked by the one thing that he does not have. The eunuch does not get sidetracked. Rather, he focuses on what he can do. He can go to Jerusalem, he can worship, and he can read the scriptures. You know what often prevents people from coming to God is not a lack of evidence, but often what prevents people from coming to God is anger misdirected at God. Proverbs 19, verse 3. The eunuch is not angry at God. He's not angry at what has happened to him in life, but he's seeking to make the best of whatever hand life has dealt him. He's also a man that's not easily offended. Being a eunuch, when he came to Jerusalem, he would be somewhat treated as a second-class citizen. He would not be able to go certain places that Jewish males could go and worship. There was somewhat of an exclusion here. That does not seem to have turned him off from pursuing God. I don't find him feeling sorry for himself or upset. Rather, on his way back home, he is reading the scriptures. He is seizing the day or the opportunity. He is making good use of his time. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 16. He cannot get enough of God. Interesting. He is not looking for a reason not to believe. And that sometimes trips people up. Too many people are looking for a reason, maybe not the best reason, but just any reason why they don't have to serve God. Also, he was willing to listen to an explanation to a passage that he did not understand. I also find a lot of humility here on the part of this man. He is obviously an important person. He is very good at what he does. He is talented, and yet he understands that the talents that he has for being a treasurer and running a treasury or civic sort of duties, administration, etc., does not necessarily translate automatically into understanding the Bible the first time you read it. He's humble. He's important, but he's a humble man. I'm impressed that when Philip comes up and says, "Do you understand what you're reading?" he does not get offended or defensive and say, "Who do you think you're talking to?" Or "leave me alone," or kind of bug off buddy, but rather he admits his ignorance. How can I except someone guide me? He's not arrogant and he's not proud. Not only that, but he's not someone who is anti-people. He's not someone who says, all those people in the world, there are just too many people. He's accessible. That's something else I found that is very important, whether someone changes their life or not, improves their life, or whether they have a good life or not. Are you accessible to other people? Is your life open for people to come into it? Are you open for advice? Are you open for a conversation? He was. He did not have the attitude, leave me alone. I like my privacy. I like my time to myself. I'm sitting here in my chariot and enjoying a nice, quiet morning or afternoon, and just leave me alone. That is not his attitude. If that had been his attitude, he may have never been saved. So, enjoying being with other people and interact with people, that's an important part of ending up being saved. He's also eager to learn. As the passage he was reading from Isaiah, he's not sure the proper application of the passage. Is Isaiah talking about himself or of someone else? And he doesn't try to cover his ignorance. He doesn't try to pretend that he knows. He's not trying to run a bluff with Philip. He uses his time. He uses his opportunities. He had went to Jerusalem to worship. He's on his way home reading the scriptures. He sees the opportunity for some help, and he jumped at the first chance to be baptized. And so those are really important attitudes. And so be careful about the attitudes of, I don't like people, I don't like to be bothered, I don't need any help, and I can figure it all out by myself. Typically, that will keep you lost. People end up lost not because they lack opportunities. When I look at Acts chapter 8 and the other examples of conversion in the book of Acts, I'm impressed by a number of things. First of all, God knows where people are. Here is a man on a road from Jerusalem to Gaza. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and yet God knows exactly who's on that road. God knows who's looking for the truth. I never find anyone in the Bible who is looking for God who is not able to find him. And so it doesn't really matter where you live or how remote your location, or whether you live off somewhere in South America or Africa or what people consider way far off places. God knows where you're at. And God can get the truth or the gospel to you. God has no problem there. God was able to get the gospel to the eunuch, to the Samaritans, to Cornelius, to the jailer, to Lydia, to the Corinthians, etc. Anyone in the Bible that had a good, honest heart who was looking for truth was able to find that truth. God was even able to get the truth to a man like Pilate, who would be surrounded by all sorts of soldiers and security and etc. God can get the truth to anyone. So people end up lost not because they lack opportunities. In fact, like in this case, the opportunity that God provides is often the best opportunity that could ever come your way. Whether people like the eunuch and Cornelius and Lydia and the jailer end up saved, or even like Rahab in the Old Testament, who ends up having her life spared and becoming part of Israel, the reason that those people end up spared or saved or delivered is because they seized the moment that was given to them. They did not procrastinate, and they did not just assume that they would be given another opportunity just as good the next day or the day after that, etc. They realized that the opportunity that they were given needed to be seized and taken advantage of. So keep that in mind if you are not a Christian and the gospel shows up to you and someone invites you for a Bible study or the services. Don't just assume that you're going to get the same exact opportunity a month from now, a year from now, etc. I remember when I was 20 years old and I encountered the gospel for the first time in my life, the truth, and I clearly understood what it said and where I stood, and I was lost. And I remember working in a grocery store and I remember exactly where I was, on the back aisle between a swinging double door that went in and out of the back room. And I remember thinking to myself, I can either do this now, obey the gospel, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, or I can put it off. I could wait until I'm like 60 years old and tired of having fun and blah, 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 which was a stupid thought, but that was my thought at the time. But part of me said, Mark, if you put it off now, you probably never will do it. This is your moment. This is your window. This is your opportunity. And I seized it. And I was baptized that night in the Christ for the forgiveness of my sins, like those in Acts chapter 2 and in verse 38, or like the eunuch here. Something else that we note here is that you can really help the person teaching you by asking pertinent questions and participating in the process. First, the eunuch's accessible. He's eager to learn. He's humble. Wow. That makes it a lot easier on the teacher. Many people end up lost because they just are not accessible, not willing to be accessible, not willing to rearrange or adjust their schedule for a Bible study or for a conversation, not willing to read the text or just take the time to do that. And they're not eager to learn, and they're not humble. Secondly, the eunuch had prepared himself for the Bible study. He had somewhat of an understanding, a working knowledge of the scriptures. It's very hard to teach someone, particularly if you're just starting from scratch and the person knows nothing. It can be done. Yeah, that was my case. I'd never read the Bible before. But it helps out when the person that you're seeking to teach is making the effort like, hey, I'm reading the Bible, I'm reading ahead, I'm reading as fast as I can, I'm reading everything I can get my hands on as far as the Bible, so at least I'm getting up to speed and having somewhat of a working knowledge of the text or the overall account in the Bible. He was open. He was very honest. Philip, here's something I don't understand. He didn't keep his questions to himself. He wasn't guarded. Philip, I don't understand who the prophet is talking about in Isaiah 53. He's willing to listen to an explanation. Philip then proceeds from what he was reading on Isaiah 53 and proceeds to talk to him about Jesus. In the next verse, he is hollering to be baptized. Note the exclamation point. Thus, talking to someone about Jesus naturally includes mentioning that you need to be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, because that's what Jesus commanded in Mark 16, verse 16. So you really haven't been told about Jesus until you've been told what Jesus told us to do to be saved. Just telling someone about Jesus stops short unless you say, hey, and by the way, not only here's who Jesus is, he died for your sins, but here's what he told you to do in order to have your sins forgiven. That's a very important piece of information. Also, the eunuch lets Philip know he's ready to be baptized. That's verse 36. What prevents me from being baptized? That's where you can help the person teaching you. That is, hey, can I do it now? And the answer is, yeah, if you believe that Jesus is the Christ and that you have begun to turn from your sins and you have counted the cost and you realize that you're lost and baptism is the line between lost and saved, and upon that Jesus will add you to his church, and that encounters new responsibilities. God expects you to live differently now. You're to put him first. There's a moral component. There's a way that you handle your relationships. There's obligations you have to him now. You're expected to meet with his people and worship, etc. Yeah, you can be baptized at any time. There are no set times in the Bible that are official times to be baptized. Often in the Bible, we find that people were baptized immediately or the same hour of the night, as in this case. And notice the prompt obedience. Philip, the chariot was ordered to stop. They both went down into the water because it is immersion. That's important. The water was not brought to the eunuch. and just sprinkled on his head or poured on his head. They both went down into the water, and that's what the word baptism means. It's an immersion. It was done right then and there because that's how important it is. It is the line between lost and saved. 1 Peter 3:21, baptism now saves you. Or Acts 22 and verse 16, why do you delay? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins. And so until you've been baptized, you still have your sins. Then, notice this. The man ends up saved because he did not delay. He didn't make any excuses. He didn't say, well, I need to think about that. No rationalizations. Hey, I'm not as bad as anybody else. No procrastination. When you're an adult and you understand that you're lost and you need to be baptized, delay is dangerous because it will dull your conscience. It will weaken your resolve. All right? So, seize the day. Prompt obedience keeps the fires of zeal and passion burning, and such translates into entering the Christian life with both feet on the ground, running. Now, the Spirit of the Lord will snatch away Philip, and the eunuch saw him no more, and he went on his way rejoicing. Someone now might ask the question, what chance did this new believer have of remaining faithful? Didn't God leave him all alone? But it's interesting. The text doesn't indicate that God made a mistake here. Therefore, I do not need perfect circumstances in which to remain faithful. I'm not sure, as the Philip goes back to Ethiopia, if there are any other Christians there yet. But he is one, and God doesn't seem to worry about that. I've seen people remain faithful in some of the most difficult circumstances possible. And I have seen people that have grown up in great homes, fantastic Christian parents, went to Bible class all the time growing up, had great teachers, heard good preaching, was under the shepherding of good elders, and they blew it. And they fell away. And they threw away ideal circumstances in which to thrive and grow. It's not about the circumstances. It's about you. Do you love God with all your heart? If you love God with all your heart, the circumstances don't really matter. He could go back, he could teach people in Ethiopia, there could be a local congregation there, and etc., and he would be just fine. But if you don't love God with all your heart and you're surrounded by ideal circumstances, those ideal circumstances are not necessarily going to keep you saved if you don't love God with all your heart. You're responsible for your own spiritual life and spiritual growth. And so those are my thoughts on attitudes, very helpful attitudes that are necessary for conversion. The man seized the opportunity. The man was humble. He was willing to learn. He was accessible. He asked good questions. He took a look at the text. And when confronted with what the text said, he promptly obeyed. Those are the people that end up saved, and those are the people that stay faithful. And my name is Mark Dunnigan. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, we'll see you later.